Marguerite Spratt. My husband was James Spratt, who was president for over 40 years of the Stoutenburgh Teller Family Association. He was the descendant of Jacobus Stoutenburgh and the first settler here in Hyde Park. I am a life member of the Stoutenburgh family. I have given tours in this house of William Stoutenburgh for quite a few years. I gave these tours to historical associations. Usually they were people who were very interested in the fact that this is the oldest house in Hyde Park. I was very honored to give those tours because it certainly enlightened a lot of people to the history of Hyde Park and to this wonderful family that settled here in Hyde Park, who were the original settlers of Hyde Park. It all started with Pieter Stoutenburgh. In 1635, Pieter Stoutenburgh came from a very quaint village in Holland called Amersfoort. Peter was about 19 years old, and so he was the first Van Stoutenburgh that came over to New Amsterdam, okay, from Amersfoort, Holland. He came over here supposedly on the same boat that Governor Keefe came over on. The boat's name was Herring. Pieter arrived in New Amsterdam in 1638. Then he married Effigie van Tenhoven, and they had 9 children. Pieter was a very honorable gentleman and very well-known, educated man. In 1638, when he arrived here in New Netherlands. It is a Dutch colony at the very beginning. The English took the rule over New Amsterdam, and it becomes New York in 1664. The English again retained Pieter Stoutenburgh as treasurer because he had done such a good job. He was a magistrate, and in 1676, he became treasurer of New Amsterdam. So he was treasurer really through the Dutch and the English rule of New Amsterdam. Pieter brought his tulips over from Holland, and he brought them in his pocket. He had a very, very large garden down in New Amsterdam, and it is believed that he introduced the tulips to the country. It was known that he brought over these beautiful tulips and made a beautiful garden for many years. His home was next to the wall on Broadway of New Amsterdam. The wall was built to protect the inhabitants of the area of New Amsterdam from the Indians. The wall ran from the East River to the Hudson River, and next to this wall was the boundary line on the north side, and that was where Pieter built his home. They had to remove his home that was next to the wall because they needed to expand New Netherlands. Where Peter had his home and his garden was on Broadway and by the wall. And now that is where the Equitable building is in New York City. Pieter was an elder of the Dutch Church in New Amsterdam between 1698 and 1699. And he died in New York 1699 at approximately 86 years old. One of the sons of Pieter was Tobias. He was born in New Amsterdam. He was baptized in 1660, January the 18th. He actually lived in New Amsterdam. He married Anneke van Ruwengam. Tobias and Anneke had 7 children. Tobias died in 1715. Tobias's daughter, Mary, married Richard de Cantillon. And down by the river, they call that oftentimes the de Cantillon Landing and the Stoutenburgh Landing. And that is where the railroad station is at the present time. Originally, there were 9 men who were given property in this region. They were called patents. The patent divided land bordering the Hudson River into 9 water lots for each owner. Each water lot was about a half a mile wide and about 4.5 miles deep. Each man of these 9 people wanted property along the river because that was the only way that they could travel in those days, was by boat to come up to this property. The 9 Partners Patent was formed in 1697. The 6th water lot is where the Roosevelt home is now. Roosevelt did not have the original property, but that's where the home is. Tobias and Annika van Roengan had a son called Jacobus Stoutenburgh, and he was born in 1696. He married in May 25th, 1717, to a well-known family, Margaret Teller. She was the daughter of William Teller of Phillipsburg. She was born in 1696. Jacobus and Margaret were married in New York, and they moved to Phillipsburg. That's near Tarrytown in Westchester County. Jacobus and Margaret had 9 children: Tobias, Rachel, William, Anna, Jacobus Jr., John, Peter, Margaret, and Luke. And they were all born in New Netherlands or Phillipsburg. They were born before Jacobus came up to Hyde Park. Annika van Roengan's brother was one of the original owners of the 9th water lot, which is in Hyde Park. And he died very, very shortly after he became in possession of it. So Annika, Jacobus's mother, came into this 9th water lot. Anna sold her share to her son Jacobus Stoutenburgh. So by 1743, Jacobus Stoutenburgh owned the 9th water lots and 4 large interior lots. When Jacobus Stoutenburgh came to Hyde Park, and I'm not going to call it Hyde Park, I'm going to call it Stoutenburgh because that's the land. It wasn't until 1812 that the name became Hyde Park. When Jacobus first came up here, he built 2 stone homes, and he had laborers build these 2 stone homes. There is only 1 stone home that is marked in Hyde Park. It was a very large home of Jacobus Stoutenburgh. At that time, he brought his family up from Phillipsburg, so consequently he enjoyed his home. It was made out of stone. When the British came up the river to fire upon Kingston, which was the capital at the time, they fired cannonballs at the Stoutenburgh house because the Stoutenburgh house was on a knoll overlooking the river, and they could see it very decidedly. And since all of Jacobus's sons were patriots or were fighting in the Revolutionary War, that's why the English fired the cannonballs at the house. Supposedly, it went through one door on the south side and came out the east side of the Dutch door, supposedly. Now, that's really quite a story to think that a cannonball could do that. But they did find cannonball remnants and shots in the hill where Stoutenburgh had his home. So Jacobus had to go to William's house, which was out in East Park, to live while the English people were going up and down the river firing on his house. He wanted to make sure that they were safe. They hid all of their silver in the hillside, supposedly, because they wanted to make sure that the English didn't acquire the silver. And the English actually came on land and came up Pine Woods Road, and Luke and maybe several other people captured and killed him. Each one of Jacobus's sons was in the American Revolution, and they held high honors. Tobias was a colonel, Peter was a captain, Luke was a captain, and William was a private. This is why, of course, when the English went up the river, they tried to bomb Jacobus's house because he was such an avid Revolutionary War patriot. There are supposedly some cannonballs that were fired from the British, and they are in possession of the Stoutenburgh family. Margaret died February the 23rd, 1788. Jacobus died in 1772. Jacobus left in his will to his children properties in Hyde Park as well as in the outlying areas of this Clinton County. Jacobus, where he had his home, he left supposedly an acre of land in back by the Crum Elbow Creek, where he had a cemetery built for his family. And that is where Jacobus and Margaret are both buried, and many of the children. Jacobus had his slaves that he had buried actually within the cemeteries because he felt so highly of them. Jacobus gave a piece of property to the east of his 9 partners' patent to William, his son. Many of Jacobus's children also built homes, and they were out of stone. Jacobus Jr., he left property from the 9th Order lot up by what is now Route 9 and to the south of that property. Jacobus Jr. then in turn purchased more property, and that is where the second stone house is in Hyde Park. Peter, a son of Jacobus, and another daughter, Anna, were given property out near the sister Margaret. The map shows the area that Jacobus gave to Luke for his land, and Luke later on divided his portion of land into what is primarily the village of Hyde Park today, showing you all the lots that he laid out, supposedly for people to build on. Jacobus Stoutenburgh's daughter Margaret was given a parcel of land in the northeast section of the precinct that Jacobus owned the property, and she married a John Teller, and they had a mill at this residence off to the side. If you know what a millstone is, the millstone is about 9 inches thick, and they moved that millstone from my land, which was at Margaret's home. They moved all the way over to the Rhinebeck home of Caroline Thorne Wells' home in Rhinebeck, and Caroline Thorne Wells used it as a doorstep at her home. It was a half a millstone. That millstone was also then transferred down to underneath the gates at the Stoutenburgh Cemetery. So that is actually a true millstone from the John Teller and Margaret Stoutenburgh's Teller's home and mill. We had a very hard job moving that stone. We had to have a man that had a truck. He had to go up there in his truck and bring it down because it's a very, very heavy piece of stone, but it has all the grooves in it that as the mill turned around, it was able to grind flour. I'm very proud of that millstone. To think it came all the way from Margaret Stoutenburgh Teller's home in my land, all the way over to Rhinebeck, and then all the way from Rhinebeck down to Hyde Park. And that is a true relic for the Stoutenburghs to have in the cemetery. In 1722, William was born in the city of New York. He was baptized on June the 3rd in the Old Dutch Church of New York. In 1750, William, his father Jacobus, and his slaves built a stone home and a barn on this land. On July 5th, 1753, William married Maria van Vleck in the New York Dutch Church. William and Maria had 6 children, and they brought up a very large family in this home. In later years, Jacobus gave his brother William a large tract of land lying on both sides of Creek Road, taking in the whole width of the 9th water lot. William died in 1780 and was buried in the Stoutenburgh Teller Cemetery off of Doty Avenue in Hyde Park. In 1933, the family of both the Stoutenburghs and the Tellers formed an association to help preserve the William Stoutenburgh house, the family cemetery, and other artifacts. My husband, James Spratt, was very proud of being a Stoutenburgh and part of the Teller family. In 1978, it was known that the William Stoutenburgh house was for sale. This being the oldest house in Hyde Park, the family, under James Spratt's direction, decided to buy it back for the family. The asking price was $54,000. They negotiated with the federal and state government for grants, and also in addition to raising funds from the family members, Mr. Richard Wood, a family member, donated a large sum of $10,000, making it possible for the association to purchase the house. Hence, the wood room on the north side of the house was named in his honor. To maintain the house and pay the taxes, it was necessary to have renters for the rest of the home. And in 2004, the William Stoutenburgh house became a tax-free exemption. In the 1950s, James took over the presidency of the Stoutenburgh Teller Family Association. There were approximately 50 people that belonged to the Stoutenburgh Teller Family Association that they knew belonged, and that they were verified as members. By the time he left being president, he had a list of over 500 people who were members of the Stoutenburgh Teller Family Association. So he worked very hard, very, very hard in building up the association. Also, Jim had a historical plaque put up out here of the history of the house. And over the door, there's also a history of it was designated by a historical grant. The original William Stoutenburgh house had a small porch on the front outside. The William Stoutenburgh house originally had slaves for the Underground Railroad that stayed here as they emerged north from the south. There is an original window, the only window in the house that is of original back to William, is in the kitchen on the south side of the kitchen. All the other windows have been revitalized in the house. On the south side of the front door of the William Stoutenburgh house, there is a stone cut with the figure 1750. And a stone on the north side of the door is marked 1765. The 2 portraits that are done in the north room of the William Stoutenburgh house are reproductions of the original portraits of Jacobus Stoutenburgh and his wife, Margaret Teller. Supposedly they were done when Jacobus married Margaret Teller. They are like wedding pictures of theirs. They are unknown artists. Margaret Teller is holding a rose in her hand, and that is quite a symbol of one of the early artists in that period. The portraits that are down in the museum in the city of New York are done on wood, and they are about half the size of these portraits. But when the man who did the reproduction made these much larger. But again, these are of oil. The two portraits that are in the entryway of this home are of Tobias Teller and his wife, Paulina Samus Dennis. And they had a home up in the Red Hook area. And these portraits were again given from Gilbert Stoutenburgh to his daughter, Ruth Walker. And the artist is unknown who did these portraits, but they are of oil, and they are of the original portraits. They are not reproductions. The mantelpiece that we're sitting in front of in this William Stoutenburgh house came originally from the Jacobus Stoutenburgh house that sat on the hill in the village of Hyde Park. When the family took this home over, several members of the Stoutenburgh family took this mantle that had been in a garage and brought it in here and took this mantle that was here out and put this mantle in. So this is truly a mantle from Jacobus Stoutenburgh's house, which everyone is very, very proud of. And as far as I know, it's the same color paint and everything that the mantle originally was. The coat of arms needlepoint is sitting over the fireplace, and that was done by a Stoutenburgh family. This is some of the china that Ruby Stoutenburgh gave to the family. She was the daughter of Tobias W. Stoutenburgh and Henrietta Benton Stoutenburgh. There were many pieces that she gave of this china, and tea set, coffee and saucers and sauce dishes, and also a pair of candlesticks. There are things in that cabinet, some glassware that have a big S on them, and they were also given by, I believe, Tony Walker's sister. The deed in this picture is from Jacobus Stoutenburgh to his son, Luke Stoutenburgh. He dated it March the 14th, 1768. This deed conveyed to Luke 2 parcels of land in the 9th Warder lot, and that is the main section of Hyde Park. If you turn the picture over, you can see the back of this parchment deed, and it was signed by Jacobus Stoutenburgh. It's framed and preserved historical deed to the Stoutenburgh Family Association, and that was given in memory of James Spratt. In 1916, Colonel Walter Elliott composed circles of the family names. He did 3 charts. There are approximately 3,000 names, births, deaths, and so forth on these family members. And each chart starts out with Pieter to Tobias to Jacobus to William. And then these are some of Jacobus's children. Now, not all of them are on here. They are also on some of the other maps. Maud Stoutenburgh Elliott wrote a whole little booklet called the Knickerbocker Jingles. There is a very nice poem about Peter and how he brought his tulips over from Holland. This is a little poem that Maud Stoutenburgh Elliott wrote in 1927. She wrote 2 jingles, which represents, I think, a lot of life of the Stoutenburgh family. This is one on Pieter Stoutenburgh. Okay, cute. When Pieter Stoutenburgh arrived, who had from Holland fled, with him he brought some tulip bulbs in an old storage box, 'tis said. The equitable building stands where many a tulip gay once in his famous garden grew on what is now Broadway. When blossomed in profusion, tulips lovely to behold, his garden reached the stockade of Wall Street, I am told. Now he who loves the tradition wall, or holdeth tulips dear, should not forget the Hollander who introduced them here.
Hi, I'm Tony Walker. I took care of the cemetery cut the grass for about 23 or 4 years, I guess. The original gate, this gate here, was back in that corner, back in that far corner, and it was bothering Vanderbilt because everybody used to walk back there on his property. That the gate was taken from the back and put here in 1933 or so, 32, and this was long before that. So this grave was here before they put the gate in there. So you're walking right over his grave when you come in.
My favorite stories in summary of the cemetery would be that it was given by Jacobus Stoutenburgh in his will to reserve an acre of land in the back of his house for a burial ground for his family. John, his son, put up a stone wall around this cemetery, and it only includes approximately a half an acre. The original writing by Jacobus in his will gives an acre of land. So the family has lost at least a half an acre. And it was because John built this stone wall around the cemetery. We're not too sure where that other half an acre is.